Do business. Act business.
Professional development these days is very important because employers and employees must be able to create a relationship that can help them to not just be strategic, but to also impact on their operations, which in the long run impacts on the bottom line. Businesses today must begin to understand that human capital development is taking a totally different direction in the digital age. You're welcome. This is Business Matters. This is where business truly matters. And my name is Stephen Ipalabo Lawson. The Human Development Index is one of those metrics that companies as well as organizations and countries use to determine how well the citizens of that particular space are engaged. If we're able to improve on that, then we have to begin to leverage on different opportunities, especially what the online platforms offers. Let us have our business update.
Hey beautiful, your eyes, your smile are all begging me to take you home tonight. Now reading page 3. Experience unlimited super-fast internet access from Intel 4G.
Intel. Live more.
It's our tradition on Business Matters to invite a professional in a given field to help us explore a topic of the day in order for us to gain insight that we can use to improve our businesses. Let us have our professionals segment. Alright, joining me in the studio to do justice to the topic, professional development in a digitally mobile age, is an entrepreneur who has over 70 years experience founding digital marketing startups, as well as some softwares as a service. As a matter of fact, his startup have helped raise over $10 million in growth capital and have employed more than 500 people globally. He has worked with Fortune 500s as well as global brands such as Starbucks and definitely with governments in the US, Europe, and the MENA regions. He lives in Cairo, Paris, Washington, D.C., Dubai, and London, and has a BBA from the American University in Cairo, as well as management degrees from George Washington, as well as Middlesex University. As a matter of fact, he's an individual whose business stems up from passion to see exactly how they can create access to affordable, high-quality education impacts as it impacts on the societies across the world. Joining me in the studio is no other person than the founder of the NEXFORD University, which he started in 2018. Is no other person than Mr. FADL Al Tarzi, the CEO and president of NEXFORD University. How are you, Tarzi?
Hello, Peter. Thank you for having me today.
It's an amazing profile you have there. When my producer told me that we're going to be having someone like you who actually has a very good experience in the area of human development, especially as it deals with professional development in the world today, I was very excited because I know in a country like ours, there is a need for us to begin to, open our eyes to different kinds of options. But let us start the questions this way. 2020 has been a major challenging year for everybody. As a matter of fact, the corona pandemic, brought about a whole way of doing business, and that itself has impacted on careers as well as professionals, lifestyle, and definitely the way we work and do business. How has the experience been for you, especially for somebody like you who is in the online business?
Thank you for having me today. Definitely, it's been a very challenging year for us and for lots of other startups and companies across the world. I think for us, looking at the positive side, it's been an accelerant, I would say. So it's accelerated awareness of online education across the world. What would have probably taken multiple years to happen has happened over just a 1 year period.
That's true.
So you can think of it this way. Maybe 2 years ago, the dialogue was more around, is online education a phase we're going through? Is it a fad that's going to pass away, or is it here to stay? Is online education credible, or is it not? Today, that discussion is no longer taking place, really. It's a reality. It's here. The largest universities in the world have had to move online, so it's definitely here to stay. So it's changed the nature of the dialogue that we are having with parents, with employers, with prospective learners. So that's been great for the university.
And for the corona pandemic, as a matter of fact, there was the situation of lockdowns, and children had to now begin to, opt for digitally empowered or enabled platform for them to get an education.
Exactly.
So obviously, the age, which is obviously digital as well as mobile, is here to stay.
It's definitely here to stay. And like I said, I think all that's happened is that it's accelerated a trend that we've been seeing build up for multiple years. Contrary or in contrast with some of the other universities across the world, we've seen this trend coming for a while now, and all that's happened is that we've leapfrogged a few years.
That's true.
I think it's here to stay, and people have seen the advantages and potentially some of the disadvantages as well. Like online isn't necessarily going to take over offline, but we think, I would dare to say even 5 or maximum 10 years from now, there will be no such thing as a completely offline university. It will simply not exist anymore.
Well, it's true because, the world is changing. There was a time when we had to do with a typewriter. Now, if you're using the typewriter, everybody looks at you as some kind of queer human being.
Right.
And so the skill set that was tenable in the age where we had to obviously use some of those bricks and mortar systems is obviously not the same skill set that will definitely be a guarantee in terms of success in your career or professional or even business. Will you share with us what kinds of skill set we should be looking forward to, especially in this new age that is all digital?
Sure. Prior to digital, we do analysis every year by talking to employers and surveying, hundreds of employers across the world. We just published our most recent report about 2 months ago, analyzing the skills in highest demand. Before we talk about digital, I would say the most critical skills employers are looking for still remain the soft skills.
Okay.
So critical thinking, strategic thinking, problem solving, and communication skills.
Okay.
I would say these are still the top 4 skills in highest demand by employers across the world. And contrary to popular belief, they're actually in shortage as well. So employers are struggling to find employees that actually master these 4 skills in particular. There's been a huge focus on technical skills over the past years. There's been this obsession with coding skills and programming and maybe even data science, which of course are in high demand. But before those, you have your fundamental, soft skills are still in shortage, and employers value those more than coding skills.
Wow.
Having said that, yes, definitely digital transformation has massively, increased in demand across the world. So employers are looking for people who can help an organization, I would say, bridge 2 very different worlds. The world of business with the world of technology.
Even as an employer, because an employer who actually has a grasp of some of how this works itself, obviously is going to be a very good model of a leader for the employees, as a matter of fact.
Definitely. Employers are struggling today to move their businesses online, to deploy e-commerce, to market digitally, to manage a remote workforce. I mean,
Sure.
things as simple as cloud computing, for example, today, if you look at demand for, cloud computing and cloud computing skills, it's just skyrocketed over the past couple of years. Businesses that were still using, physical data centers and servers on premises have found themselves completely obsolete overnight. They were literally unable to run their businesses.
That's true. Well, great. One of the things that Tarzi, is the fact that Bill Gates actually wrote a book which was titled "Business at the Speed of Thought," and we know that some of the content which Bill Gates, as a matter of fact, meant to posited, actually focused on self-guided education,
Yes.
self-guided knowledge acquisition, knowledge not an end in itself, but
Yes.
knowledge as a means towards a particular end.
Yes.
And we know the world today is obviously we're in a digital world. The AIs are beginning to take over the jobs of the man who is in the factory worker. We're beginning to see where now even kids are beginning to code, even though we know the soft skills are very much important
Yes.
in order to make them very employable. But we also know that there are those who actually were born far before the millenniums. And now they have to change, they have to face and change some of those issues with this. And one of the ways that people oftentimes believe is the best way to actually gain knowledge is through distance and online education.
Yes.
But the merits and demerits of that, is it a tenable option, especially for a country like ours that we don't have enough universities? The graduates who come out of the universities themselves don't seem to have enough jobs. We know people can be working in India, for example, and they're living in India and then they're working somewhere in the United States. So
Yes.
obviously, where does distance education come in, or online education, as you may please, come in terms of job creation, in terms of knowledge acquisition, and of course closing the gap?
Yeah, great question, Peter. I mean, I think to start with your point on what we refer to as lifelong learning,
True.
I would say that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest shift that's happened in education over the past decade. Education can no longer be thought of as a point in time where you go to college for X number of years, you're done, you go into the workplace, and
It's an ongoing process.
Yes, exactly. It's an ongoing process, and therefore, I would say the most valuable skill you obtain from particularly an undergraduate degree is learning how to learn. So universities that are teaching people how to learn are going to set them up for success. Universities that are teaching folks how to memorize and pass an exam are not going to set them up for success. And unfortunately, the vast majority of traditional universities are too fixated on the latter. So it's how do you pass an exam? That's not a skill that's going to be particularly valuable.
I know
throughout
there
your
was a
life.
joke out there that says that whoever created exams, we need to see that person and then. I
couldn't agree more.
because examinations oftentimes people argue it's not a true test of knowledge.
Completely.
There are situations where we have first class degree holders
Exactly.
who are being employed by third class degree holders.
Exactly.
So how do we do that? Anyway, we're going to go on a short break.
Sure.
Viewers, this has been quite an engaging subject for me. Because professional development is something that's so very dear to our hearts. The more you have your employees, even yourself as an employer, well developed, the more your business is going to be successful. But we're going to be back with the conversation after this short break.
Experience unlimited super-fast internet access from Intel 4G.
Intel. Live more.
All right, thank you. If you've just joined us, I'm in the studio with Mr. FADL AL TARZI, the CEO and President of NEXFORD University, and we are looking at the subject professional development in a digitally mobile age. And before we went on a break, we looked at the question that had to do with job creation, the fact that you don't have to live in India, for example, to actually work in India. Some of the skills that can actually give you that kind of access,
Yes.
obviously has to be digital skills. Nobody's going to be telling you whether you have a degree in this or that, but are you able to deliver on the task at hand?
Exactly. It's about skills and competencies. It's no longer about like what piece of paper do you have on the wall. Now, ideally, you want your university credential to be focused on these skills and competencies that companies are looking for. But to your point, I think the biggest shift that's happening in the employment market today is remote workforces. And COVID has accelerated that.
It is.
Still, psychologically, people, a lot of employers still want to feel that the employees are within proximity. But if you think about it, during lockdown and everybody was working from home,
Absolutely.
what difference does it make if I'm in Lagos or Mexico or Philippines, right? It doesn't really matter. And that's presenting a huge opportunity for economic mobility, I think particularly for Nigeria. So if you look at Nigeria across, the higher education space and the employment space, you have the same problem exists in terms of supply and demand mismatch. So you have something like almost 2 million university applications every year, whereas there's maybe about 800,000 university seats.
Or less, as a matter of fact.
Even less. Some people say about 600 even. So there's a huge delta, right, between the number of applications and the university seats available. So that means people will have to find other solutions. And we think the only other solution is to go to an online university, right? Because the vast majority of those can't afford to travel abroad. So you're going to have to go to an online university. Now, the same thing exists in the job market. So the number of university graduates every year compared to the number of job openings that exist every year is also going to have a huge mismatch. So I think, despite all the efforts taking place, it's highly unlikely that the Nigerian economy will produce enough jobs for university graduates every year.
There is a deficit in jobs, as a matter of fact. The unemployment index itself is obviously telling towards the negatives, and that is not very good because
Exactly.
it impacts on your GDP. You realize that you might have social unrest, and that there are no social nets which can actually, mitigate against the negative impact.
And that's
of
unlikely
poverty.
going to change over the coming few years.
Yeah.
That's the bad news. But the good news is you have other markets that have the opposite problem. So you have markets like the US or the UK, for instance. Over the coming 10 years, these markets are going to face an aging population, which means, the majority of their populations are going to be over at age 50 or even over age 60, which is completely opposite to sub-Saharan Africa in general, right? So what that means is they're going to have to rely on talent from across the world. Now, the youngest population in the world is in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So you're either going to have to immigrate to these markets, which we think is an unsustainable option, right? You can't continue exporting basically millions of people every year. What's going to happen is the world is going to move towards what we call a virtual talent grid. Think of it as literally this grid around the world that's connected by internet. So to get on that grid, all you need is two things. You need to have an internet connection. You need to have skills. If you have the skills, you can get on the grid. The moment you're on the grid, you're connected to the global job market. And that, I think, is an amazing opportunity for Nigerian youth to be able to access economic opportunity regardless of their physical location.
Capital oftentimes is the bane for a lot of young entrepreneurs, and you
Yes.
started up as an entrepreneur
Yes.
at quite an early age. That is quite commendable. So you've learnt the ropes and all that, and know exactly. So I mentioned to you earlier on that I'm very sure my audience would like to tap into some of the ways to actually, go around the maze to see how do we go about the fundraising, number one, and then how do we leverage on the digital platform to create very, very transformative strategies for our businesses.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big question.
It is.
I think, first of all, in the fundraising, to be honest, like the advice I would give entrepreneurs is to not overthink and overfocus on fundraising. There's this often misbelief or misconception that fundraising is the solution to your startup's problem. If only we had, more funding, we'd be able to do all of these things. Whereas in reality, funding generally tends to follow success. So if you focus on building a business that is unique from either a service offering perspective or customer acquisition perspective, investors, by definition, their job is to invest. So you're not asking a VC for a favor to invest in you, right? They need to invest in your company to make money. So it's about how do you build a company that's super attractive to attract that investor. That's what you should be focused on, as opposed to spending, the majority of your time. Now, that's easier said than done. I realize that completely, right?
Yeah.
So moving to your second point, I think probably one of the biggest mistakes startups or founders make is they over focus on building product. So they over engineer a product, or the product can be a service as well, and focus less on customer acquisition. I say it has to be the other way around. Okay. 9 times out of 10 you'll find that the correlation between success and failure is sales, not product. So you can have the best product in the world, but if no one's buying it, investors aren't going to invest in it. Because the biggest proof that your startup is successful is your sales. So I would say before you really start thinking about building your product and the features of that product, really focus on how are you going to acquire customers.
I want to ask you a question or two before we wrap up the interview, and this has to do with work-life balance.
Yes.
We talked earlier on about lifelong learning, as a matter of fact. A lot of businesses, as a matter of fact, owners, we go to some of the business schools here in Nigeria, and a lot of them will believe that the more knowledge you acquire helps you to be able to perform better in your business and dealings. And so when we wonder, especially for professionals who are still working, yet they have to acquire some of these advanced degrees through maybe online platforms as well. How does that affect the work-life balance? Is it much more, does it work best that way, or something that they should never be bothered about?
I think one of the reasons graduates of online schools, like in the US in particular, there are a number of research reports that actually show that graduates of online schools outperform graduates of offline schools. One of the reasons is time management.
Time management,
yes, which is a skill employers are looking for. If you're studying online while working, which the majority of people are, if you're studying online, typically you have a job as well. Like average age of an undergraduate student studying online today in the US is 37.
Wow.
So people are studying while working. You have to master time management skills. So definitely you need to be able to balance between the two. And I think the only way is to study online, especially in places like Nigeria where traffic is horrendous, right? Imagine finishing your job and having to drive 2 hours to a campus. It's just not feasible, and balance between the family. So online, I think that's a huge advantage of being able to study online. And throughout the rest of you, whenever you travel, you study on weekends, at night, and...
All right, great. Nigeria is obviously a youth-centric country. Nevertheless, there's the data themselves, the statistics has actually proven to that. And you've mentioned earlier on, you've actually had deals with emerging markets. You see where we stand today. What kinds of advice would you like to give to the government, especially in terms of whether the regulators or institutions? Because for us to leapfrog into the future is the only option in order for us to make sure that this teeming youth, we have enough to engage them, and hence be much more productive and contribute a quota to the country's GDP.
I'm not sure the Nigerian government is looking for my advice, to be very honest. Having said that, I've been to many countries across the world, and I've rarely seen a population that values education the way Nigerians do. It's really, really commendable. I think as a percentage of their income, Nigerians probably invest more in education than anyone in the world. And even in the US, if you look at Nigerian expats or Nigerian immigrants to the US, they're on average twice as educated as any other immigrant population. So having said that, it means Nigerians have the base where they really value education. That base needs to be leveraged. So to answer your question more directly, I think the challenge here is the government run organizations have a risk of becoming irrelevant. So my advice would be become relevant or move out of the way. And they're both fine. Like government's job should not be to manage and regulate all industries. So you can have overarching regulation, but maybe if you rely more on the private sector and start opening up the sector a little bit more, I think the government would see and would be able to achieve greater progress and faster. The challenge when government maintains such tight control with rather outdated policies is that over time employers start taking matters in their own hands, and so does the population. They start thinking the local regulations are not really relevant, they're so outdated, so let's just skip them. And because the world has moved digital, you no longer have the ability to control things the way you did 50 years ago. You'll simply become irrelevant. They will go online and seek other options and no longer care about what's happening locally. And we've seen that in many other markets. When people no longer believe in the local system, they just bypass it completely and they go and source what options they feel are best to enable their success in the future.
Right. Thank you very much. I think on that note, talking about time management, I would just say we'll be wrapping up this particular interview. Thank you very much, FADL Al TARZI.
Thank you.
For joining us here on Business Matters. And it's been a very engaging moment for us. We hope in the future we have another opportunity to invite you and see exactly how well we've gone. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, viewers, this is so much we can take on this particular edition. Business Matters continues after now.
Business Matters.
There's no doubt that distance and online education is a wonderful way to go in order for us to be able to close the gap, especially with the fact that our human capital development industry needs to be leapfrogged beyond where it is today. Nigeria is now majorly a youth-centric society. What kind of opportunities are we going to create for our youth in order for them to be able to be gainfully employed after they have gained their university or their education? And these are some of the things we need to begin to put in place for us as a society to take advantage of some of the global economic windows that are coming up in the future. This is so much we can bring to you on Business Matters. My name is Stephen Ipalibo Lawson. Please do follow us on all our social media platforms as well as our website, where you can get more information about our different programs. Until I come your way again, bye-bye for now.